I hope we're gonna really kind of wake everybody up to the compelling need for getting digital inclusion right. Maya?
Great. Thank you. So I'm Maya. I'm a woman on a mission to remove barriers from the digital spaces of the world, and that's I want to contribute in whatever way I can. I've been in the space for well over a decade, and there's always new things to learn as well. So here to share, here to learn. Looking forward to interacting with everybody.
Well,
Hey, take it away, Jeremy.
I am so honored to be with both of you. And again, I appreciate you both. So thank you so much for being here. Again, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, why are we here? Right? What is our purpose today? I think is really how I like to talk about that. Right? And so, what are we trying to help achieve for you as participants that are coming to this conversation? And really, this is a focus on people who are working in healthcare, e-commerce, government, even looking at financial services. And we wanted to provide you with some knowledge and tools on how to have accessibility be a driver, both for recruitment, retention of customers, looking at sales growth, employee engagement. There's so many aspects to accessibility. What we wanted to do is talk to you about how you can overcome some of those challenges with accessibility, also looking at leveraging technology that you can use and giving you tools that you can use to lead your organization into a more inclusive and compliant future. Now, thinking about what's our approach for today, as Juan Carlos is bringing up our agenda slide, I'll just say we want to start with a quick, obviously, an overview of today's agenda, right? And then we want to talk, have you weigh in the chat with a particular, some initial thoughts that you're having. We've got a brief presentation that Dan and I will kind of co-present. I'm going to do a brief demonstration of what it's like to have an inaccessible website. And then Maya is going to jump into the mix with some of her experience as she has been on her mission, as she said. We'll finally end with some tools, a Q&A, and an opportunity for you to check out to talk about what you're taking away from today. So this is meant to engage you, to excite you, and to give you some tools and techniques that are going to be helpful to you. So Juan Carlos, take us to slide 4. And in the chat, I would love to hear. I missed my logistics. I'm sorry. Before we go to the chat, let's cover some logistics. Again, my apologies. So, some things that I just like to cover with everybody as we are coming into the webinar for today. I feel like it's important to just take a step back and talk through some of the logistics. So there is live transcription that you should see on your screen. If you happen to be a person that is deaf or hard of hearing, that should be helpful to you. What I've actually found, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, sometimes that transcription can actually be helpful for people who may have some neurodiverse things going on as well. And so my partner would tell you sometimes that live description or live transcription is also helpful to keep his attention, right? And so just something to keep in mind. We would love for you to join us with your video. That is up to you, not a requirement, but if you should choose to do so, you can click the video icon. It's the second from the left in the bottom, or Alt-V on your keyboard. Command-V, I believe, if you're on a Mac. Muting and unmuting. I will ask if you're not talking to mute so that we can cut down on that background noise. Just in case you didn't know, the shortcut for that on a PC is an Alt-A. I believe it's Command-A if you're on a Mac. Have something that you want to ask or a question or would like to jump into the conversation, Alt-Y will help you raise your hand. You can also do that under the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. Chatting is also enabled. We do encourage that you participate in the chat. If you're having ideas or takeaways or questions, let us know that. If you need to quickly access that, that's an Alt-H on your screen. And though we do not have simultaneous translation for other languages, we will be doing a follow-up in 2 days, which will have a transcript in English, Spanish. If you would like other languages, please definitely let me know. And we will also have the video recording for that. So that covers our logistics. Now we'll go to the chat slide, Juan Carlos there. So tell us in the chat, if you would please, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to making your tools or your websites accessible? So again, please take a moment to interact with us. Weigh in the chat. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to digital accessibility? I'm still waiting on those chats. If you don't feel comfortable posting in the chat, feel free to unmute and tell us your name and one of the biggest challenges that you have. Well, my goodness, nobody has any challenges. Sarah, thank you so much for jumping in. So Sarah is telling us, excuse me, I apologize. So Sarah's talking about the budget and keeping it up to date when content and standards evolve. I love that, right, Sarah? Because what you're really talking about is, I don't just want it to be a one-off. I want a solution that's going to allow me to be able to keep things up to date, to be able to embrace those changes that come along. Anybody else have anything you want to share? Feel free to unmute and weigh in. Julia, I'm sorry. Is that, I can't tell if that's Julia or Julie. I apologize. I do happen to be a screen reader and sometimes it's not clear.
Julia.
It's Julia. Sorry. Thank you, Juan Carlos. So Julia talks about the trade-off of looking good and being accessible. It's an interesting thing because I think sometimes as a blind person, Julia, I don't even think about that aspect of it, right? It doesn't even cross my mind. And so that's definitely something we have. Sarah also totally agreeing with that. So we did have a couple people coming in there, and we will go ahead and move into our presentation for today. So Juan Carlos, why don't you take us to our next slide and let's get into it. Why does accessibility matter? And we'll move to the global numbers. So one of the things that I always like to think about is the numbers, right? I happen to be a big fan of, I happen to be a big fan of a leading political drama on TV. And one of the things that the president in that particular drama always says is, show me the numbers. Right. And I think when you start with the numbers, it makes the qualitative part of this conversation so much more accessible to people. And so, 25% of the global population lives with a disability. That's a huge amount. And we're not just talking about, by the way, someone like myself who has a disability of blindness that you can see when I walk into my room with a cane, my white cane. We're also talking about people who are neurodiverse, ADHD. We have all kinds of challenges that we cannot see that people have. And so that's always something that I like to think about when I'm, doing my job is, what am I not, there's an irony in this statement. What am I not seeing that I need to be seeing? Or put a different way, what am I not thinking about that maybe someone isn't showing me directly, right? 1.2 trillion combined annual income with disabilities. That's huge. That is an untapped market. If your stuff is not accessible, those people will go take their business elsewhere. And we actually do see that. 40 plus countries do have mandatory standards that talk about accessibility. 40 plus countries. And we're going to talk today specifically about the European Union and how they are prioritizing accessibility. But if you think about it, if you're doing business around the world, in the US, in Chile, in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe, you're going to face countries who say accessibility is a priority to us, and we want it to be a priority for you as an organization as well. 71% of users will leave a website and take their business elsewhere if it's not accessible. Now, we estimate that somewhere around $12 trillion a year is lost to people abandoning shopping carts, but that's an astronomically high number. So I want to put this in context for you. As I've said a couple times, I am a blind person. I use a screen reader. I shop online, and I've been doing so for the last 20 years. Over the last 20 years, yeah, when shopping online became available, by the way, I was one of the first because I didn't have to go, pay someone to take me to the store, right? But my shopping online experiences, I have left in my lifetime $256,000 sitting in shopping carts that I could not complete the buying process. That means that those companies that I abandoned my shopping carts lost $256,000 worth of business over the last 20 years just from me. Just from me. That's huge. There's lots of other benefits that I want to have Dan talk to you about. And so, Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you to start talking about talent, customer service, customer retention, and all those other aspects. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah. So yeah, let's start talking about people. As you've said, there are many, many people in this world with some kind of disability, and I don't even like using the word disability, to be honest. It has kind of negative connotation, and especially these days with the change of the man at the top in the White House, this whole idea of DEI and wokeness has kind of taken a bit of a backseat, but that is not what accessibility is about. This is not doing the right thing. This is just good business. And the first reason there is you want to have the right people working for your business. So if you're applying for a job, you want to find out about a company you work for, then you're probably going to want to go online and check out the company. Pretty much guaranteed you're going to have to apply online and upload your CV. And once you're working at a company, you're going to be using all those internal systems. Everything needs to be accessible to everybody to make everything function right. So it's really, really important that we just do this for everyone because, Jeremy, you've told us that you're blind. Other people have different disabilities that make it difficult for them to use computers and websites. But what about old people who have got failing eyesight? What about people who are just tired? People with young children and they're exhausted and they just want things to be easy and quick to use. So actually what this is all about is accessibility. Now, I've been working in digital for 30 years and I've worked with lots of companies over that time, many of the world's largest companies uh, in the UK, in Europe, and in the US. Some real giants, people like Verizon and Johnson and Johnson and HSBC and Nestle and Nissan. And what I've learned from all of those companies is that this is really, really hard. Now, accessibility has been around for at least 20 years. There's a whole world of accessibility consultants and technology and tools. There are international standards that have been agreed. So really, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that it's kind of fallen into this box where leadership probably think, hey, we already tackled accessibility. They seem to remember we said we were going to do that, right? And And every client pretty much in their RFPs, when they're trying to get a new website and working with their agencies and their IT teams, they say we need this to be accessible. And the IT folks and the agencies say, yeah, sure, we know that, we're going to make it accessible. But what actually happens is we run out of time, we run out of budget, and those accessibility features just do not get implemented, sadly. And what that means is we're missing out on a huge amount of people, whether they be potential employees, they are employees, they're customers, potential customers. As Jeremy's explained, there's a lot of money being left on the table here, and that's what we need to change. So what I find is that the reason it's become important again, or has raised up the agenda, should we say, is because we have a new law coming into effect in Europe in 2025, in June 2025. We're going to have the European Accessibility Act. And actually, this is already a similar law in the USA. It's called the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what this means is it's against the law to not be accessible. So it's no longer acceptable to let this accessibility issue slip through the cracks. It's no longer acceptable to say, hey, oh, we ran out of time, we ran out of budget, and we can't do it. So we've got to change that. And really, this requires some kind of fundamental mindset change because what people try and do these days is they try and add accessibility at the end. They build the thing and then they say, oh, let's test it for accessibility and it's going to give us a checklist and we're going to fix them. And that is not a good way to do it. It's too late, really, at that point. And one of the questions we had in the chat earlier was about budget. Well, yeah, it's going to cost more. It is going to cost more to make this site accessible, but it's going to make you more money. It's going to open up your audience. You're going to reach more people. They're going to find it easier to use your website. They're going to find it easier to work for you, to buy stuff from you, and to find out about you. So it's budget that's well spent. I propose that that budget gets moved earlier on in the process. Let's build it in from the beginning because it will be cheaper if we build it in at the beginning. So that's my comment on budget. The second thing was also in the chat there was just staying on top of things and keeping it up to date. Well, that's a really crucial issue. Accessibility is not a one and done project. You don't just make something accessible and go, we're good, because unfortunately things change and things break. Websites are dynamic, they're changing all of the time. And I'll give you a great example from a call I did last year on the same topic with a company called Unilever, who most of you probably know. Now, Unilever are a great company and they have really embraced uh, digital inclusion, accessibility in particular. They have a full-time team called the Accessibility Squad. It's their job to police the Unilever web estates, and they've got many hundreds of websites for their products and brands in all the different countries. And I even found a accessibility issue on the Unilever homepage last year, and I sent a note by email to the person I know there, and I said, "Hey, I just spotted there was this problem," and she said, "Oh no, not again." And what happens is there's so many people in these big companies constantly updating things and they break things. So there's a need to be constantly on top of this, constantly monitoring, constantly making sure things don't break. So that's the thing we've got to do is build it in from the start, and then we've got to be monitoring it all the time and keeping on top of it. And yeah, that does cost money, but it's a compliance issue, so we have to do it. But most importantly, it's good for business and it's good for all the people that work for you and for all of your customers. So that's why I think this is the important topic at the moment, and that's why I've been working on it for so long. And I think that I'm gonna just say one final thing, which is accessibility has been around a long time. There are a lot of tools, there are a lot of consultants. People have been doing this. So Why aren't websites more accessible? You would think we already had this problem solved, right? But we don't. You can use lots of tools to analyze websites automatically to see if they're compliant. And I'll be honest with you, most of them are not. There's a big study by a company called WebAIM. They've been doing it for years, very credible. They look at the 1 million homepages every year. 1 million homepages of the biggest companies, and like 95% of them fail, would you believe? Yeah, that's how bad it is. So we've got the standards and we've got the tools and we've got the consultants, but it just isn't working. And that's because we don't have leadership and accountability behind it, putting in there with the budget and keeping on top of it. And uh, that's what's going to have to change with the EAA coming in Europe, and already it's in the USA. Things are changing, and that's why we're here today. So I'm going to hand that back to you now, Jeremy, to carry on, and then I'll be asking Maya a bit about her personal experiences a little later on. Thank you.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights on this. And one of the things that I have said to you before is that's why I appreciate the partnership that CurbCutOS has with you, right? And with what you're doing, because it is critical. In the US, Juan Carlos, I'm going to go to slide 10. In the US, we've got the ADA, we've got 508, we've got 504, we've got, honestly, an interesting political situation that I'm not even going to spend any time talking about, right? But what we are seeing is that even states are looking at how they are dealing with accessibility, and how they are implementing accessibility at the state level, right? In Canada, Canada actually has, someone mentioned this to me the other day, there are spots where Canada actually has stronger regulations than the US. There are spots where we're seeing things develop in Latin America and in Chile, and in Colombia and Mexico, that are prioritizing accessibility. But one of the things that excites me as somebody who, up until I took this job with CurbCutOS, accessibility was, what do I need to do my thing, right? I was that guy, Dan, that you were talking about, that all I could do is call a company and say, I can't access your website. But there was no backing for me, right? It's the first time that now, and just instead of saying, I can't access your stuff, it's, I can't access your stuff. Here's why I need to be able to, and here are solutions that I can bring you that'll help. But one of the things that I wanted to focus on today, or that we wanted to focus on today, was the EAA. And the European Accessibility Act, called the EAA for short, is really transforming barriers across the European Union, and is essentially setting a priority on digital accessibility. Bear with me a second. I'm having a slide issue. There we go. So they are requiring that if you do business in the EU, that you have a requirement that your products and your digital assets have to be accessible to people with disabilities. This is very much like GDPR. It's going to apply to any businesses not just headquartered in the EU, but that are doing business in the EU. There's going to have a, I think someone who just joined, you are on mute. If you could mute yourself, that would be amazing. It is good to have you here, though. And so this is obviously going to apply to digital products, smartphones, digital readers. When people are shopping, they're going to be able to, they need that accessibility. And the EAA has actually said, we mandate that that's how it's going to be, right? The official enactment of this law is June 28th. And so this is an opportunity for companies to say, what do we need to do, not just to be compliant, but coming back to what Dan was just talking about, to have that also be a trickle down impact, not just compliance, but increasing our sales, increasing our customer retention, increasing our employee retention, and making our employee experience the best that it can be. Now, so I have a question before we go on to the next slide. And I just want to see if you'll weigh in the chat. Does being WGAC WCAG compliant mean that you are accessible? It's a yes or no question. Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? So if I'm WCAG compliant, am I sorry, if I'm WCAG compliant, am I accessible? I have a no coming in so far. Anybody else want to give your thoughts? You can either weigh in on the chat, or if you really want to, you can unmute and just say yes or no. Roberto is, he left, sorry. All right, well, the person who said no, you're right. Let's go to slide 11. So being, hold on just a minute, I'm sorry. It does, if you are WCAG compliant, it does show that you are compliant with legal standard. Sorry. It does guarantee that you have that compliance with the EAA specifically under their law, but it doesn't guarantee that the usability is where you need it to be. True accessibility comes from knowing that people with disabilities can actually use your products. So you can do an audit, but if you're not testing what that user experience is, and I'm going to show you what that user experience can be like for a blind person in just a second, there's a missed opportunity there. And so that is something that we wanted to call out, is just being WCAG compliant doesn't mean that that user experience is top notch like you want it to be. Let's talk about slide 12. Now, I always begin this part of the conversation with a very quick story from my own personal life. I don't know if any of you have seen it or not, but one of my favorite shows that my partner and I really got into, especially over COVID, was The Crown. Now, I'm not going to debate whether it's a great show or not, right? That's a whole different webinar. But we started watching The Crown. We got through 2 episodes, and my partner Jerry looked at me and he said, I cannot watch this with you anymore. And I was like, what's going on? It's a great show. How can you say you can't watch it? He's like, no. It's a great show. I love it. But there's so many things that are happening in the background. I cannot possibly keep up with telling you everything that you need to know as a blind person to watch this show. And I have to own for all of you, I have been blind my whole life. I fought audio description when it came on, right? The idea that somebody was going to tell me what was happening in the scene, I have to tell you, and being kind of a little irony and a little funny, sometimes my scene pictures were much better than the scenes you guys were actually watching. Okay? My imagination is a very good imagination. And I had discovered that. But my partner said, let's try turning on the audio description. And I got to tell you, 3 years later, the audio description is still on in our house. Yep, it benefits me to have it. But I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons that it's also still on in our house is because that gives my partner Jerry, who can see perfectly, the ability to look at his phone and still know what's happening on the TV. In other words, when we improve things in this particular scenario, we're talking about audio description. When we turned audio description on, it absolutely had a benefit for me as a blind person, but it also had a benefit to my partner, Jerry, who can see perfectly. And Juan Carlos, let's go to the next slide, 13. The point in this is that when we fix things for people with disabilities, we fix it for everybody. We create opportunities for everybody. And the curb cut effect is really what we're talking about here. So for those who don't know, curb cuts are what you're seeing here with the sidewalk going into the street, right? And it's the rampage effect, right? And curb cuts were originally, curb cuts were originally created because it gives you, because it gave people with disabilities, particularly people with wheelchairs, the ability to get in and out of the street or to get up and down the curb. But as you can see in the picture that's on your screen, yes, as you can see with the picture that's on your screen, we have a person in a stroller who's able to now use that curb cut. We have a person that we'll see people on bikes that can use that curb cut, right? My mother-in-law happens to have a little trouble with her knee. And so it gives her the ability to not have to take a big step down, but to take a smaller step down. A friend of mine was on crutches. And he actually made the comment to me when I saw him last week in DC that the curb cuts are so important to him now. And he never thought about using or his use of them until he had the crutches. And it made it much easier for him to get down off of the sidewalk into the street. So we've talked about the why of accessibility. We've talked about the importance when it comes to talent recruitment, when it comes to employee retention, customer retention, even when it comes to not missing out on opportunities of building market share or gross sales. So as Juan Carlos takes us into slide 14, my question is, why does progress stall? And it really comes down to some of the things that we've even talked about today, right? Sometimes it's so overwhelming. I don't know what I need to do. I don't have the knowledge or understanding of what it takes to make it accessible. Gosh, that just feels so overwhelming. We talk about this in bullet 2, a lack of an aggregated solutions and approaches, right? So many times I'm seeing companies that are working with accessibility consultants, and it's that piecemeal approach. Well, here, we can do an audit for you. And then once we do our audit, fix everything. Oh, and then we'll re-audit again. And guess what? We're going to find 17 more things that we didn't find in the first audit because we didn't do a complete audit, right? So it's about positioning yourself, working with someone who's taking a holistic approach. What we find is when you're just focused on compliance, that's a great way to open the conversation. But if that's your only checkbox that you're trying to check, then you're probably missing a whole opportunity to increase that user experience. Why? It's the lack of the system-wide approach. So you want to be taking more of that system-wide maturity modeling approach. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's ineffective existing solutions that are creating less than 1% year-over-year improvements. And that's what CurbCut and our partners are really working on overcoming. We want to see those percentages much higher. And that's why we're having webinars like this and working with our partners like Dan, like we work with every day. So I want to, before I turn it over to Dan and Maya to talk about some of Maya's experience in this, I want to take a moment to just give a very brief demonstration for you on what it's like to deal with inaccessibility. So I'm going to ask Juan Carlos if you can stop sharing your screen. Then there we go. I'm going to actually share my screen. And when I share my screen, This is going to freak you out just a little bit, but I'm going to share my screen reader as well. So for those of you who are kind of half tuned in, you probably want to tune in fully right now, because what you're about to see is not only my screen, but you're going to hear my computer and how it talks to me as well. So one moment.
Zoom main region. Group start identify execute and you will start a screen share. Press F6 to switch between open Zoom windows.
All right, just to double check, Juan Carlos, you are hearing
Participants
my
can now see your application.
jaws, right?
Yes.
All right, awesome.
Webinar presentation.
So let me get
Group and
over
webinar
to the
design. Juan
window
Carlos
that I
left there.
want.
Veblen communications inbox sharing chat vertical Zoom workplace. WhatsApp. Screen sharing meeting controls. One platform to connect vertical bar Zoom.
There we go. So because
Virtual. One platform.
we are using Zoom, I thought, why not? Let's check out Zoom, right? One thing that I gotta say, Zoom very early in the game, probably I would say from a huge pushback on the blind community when things, when Zoom came on the market, Zoom was challenged to be more accessible. It was a challenge that they were given by the community that was really wanting to tap into them. So when we look at websites using a screen reader, and I happen to use JAWS, what happens is the website gets interpreted by the screen reader and is presented to me and allows me the ability to manipulate it any way that I want. And I'll just kind of mention this as an aside. I know there's a lot of discussion on overlays. This is why overlays do not actually achieve accessibility, because if you have an overlay, like, I'm not even going to mention it. If you have an overlay like some of the ones that we see in the field, what it does is it takes over the interpretation of how my screen reader is interacting with the website. And so though it may appear that it's fixing the accessibility issue, it creates this push and pull between my screen reader and the website itself. So for most sites that have overlays on them, you may be surprised to know that someone with a screen reader actually has less accessibility on those overlay sites. Now, Zoom does not use that. So I just want to point out a couple things to you that I noticed as I was looking at the Zoom website. And obviously I'm using the word looking.
Everyone, to start.
Sorry about that. Sarah, I didn't have a chance to read that comment, so I will come back to that in just a moment. I don't want to disrupt the demo that I'm doing to go read that, so I apologize. But here's a couple things that I noticed.
One platform to connect vertical bar Zoom.
So at the top, and this is actually driven by the page title, it says one platform to connect Zoom. That's kind of cool. I like that.
Resources navigation region.
You'll see that they have done a good job of saying that this first section is resources navigation section. So I do like that they're calling that out. Notice what I'm doing is I'm using my cursor to just kind of read through the site. And I'm going line by line. So we'll kind of do some examination here.
Link skip the main content. Link skip the help chat.
So they've got links here where I could skip directly to the help chat or skip to the main content. If I wanted to do those, that's always very helpful.
Visit link accessibility overview.
There's an accessibility overview. I'm going to guess that's going to go to a new page, or at least it did earlier when I clicked it. I'm not sure. Like, notice, by the way, I've looked at the first three things on the page and I still don't have their menu bar, right?
List of 4 items. Search button.
Then I have a list of 4 items: search, support, their phone number, and contact sales and request a demo. What I found fascinating on this one,
link support search button. List of 4 items.
It said list of 4 items.
Search button. Link support.
We have search, support.
1.88.799.9666. Click to call.
There's their click to call.
Contact sales.
Request a demo. And request a demo. That's 5 items, so something is not coded right there. I don't know exactly what it is. Sometimes the techie stuff gets a little over my head, right? I'm just being honest.
List end.
Then we're done with that list.
Resources navigation region end. Main navigation region.
Now we're into the main navigation list, if you're following with me. And again, sometimes my cursor doesn't always follow the cursor on the screen, so I will ask you to bear with me.
Link graphic zoom logo.
But we have in the main navigation, they did alt tag their Zoom logo, so that does tell me that's their
List of
logo.
4 items.
There's a list of 4
Products
items
button menu
here.
collapsed.
Products,
Solutions button menu collapsed. Resources
solutions,
button menu collapsed.
resources, plans and pricing.
Withstand.
Now we did have 4 there. One of the things that I did want to point out though, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I'm just trying to point out a couple
Link
things.
resources solutions products button menu collapsed.
But if I expand this products menu, first of all, it doesn't tell me that it's expandable or not.
Products button menu collapsed.
Oh, I'm sorry. It does say products menu collapsed. See, sometimes it's hard. But when we expand this,
Banner region. Main navigation region. List with 4 items. Products button menu. Expanded.
so it does tell me that it's expanded. The way that they have this coded, though,
Virtual
if
PC.
you read down through this,
Link graphic AI companion. Empowering you to increase productivity, improve team effectiveness, and enhance skills.
so we have the AI
Learn
companion,
more.
learn
Link graphic Zoom
more.
workplace.
We've got Zoom workplace. I
List of 6
can't
items missing level 1.
actually tell.
Communication. Meetings graphic. Link meetings. Team chat graphic. Link team chat.
Like, this is just very confusing to follow. I'm just going to point that out, right? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it does look like they're trying to code it with accessibility. It almost feels to me like there is too much in this menu, and it would make me ask a sighted person if you guys felt the same, right? As you were looking at it. No one has to answer that, but that's one of the things that I'm wondering as I try to look down to this. Is it actually as clean as I would want it to be? And honestly, it's very hard to figure out where you're at in this menu. Now, I want to bring my demo to a close.
Virtual PC.
So there's a couple other things that I do want to quickly point
Phone
out.
graphic. Mail and calendar graph. Scheduler graph. Docs. Whiteboard graphic. Find what you need when you need it with AI.
One of the things that we also can do is jump by headings. In JAWS, we can jump by a lot of things, by the way. We can jump by links, unvisited links, graphics, things like that. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is heading 1 is usually going to be used for the main part of your page where you want to take people to. As you can tell, when I hit heading 1,
Execute and complete your priorities.
it took me
Find what you need when you need it
to
with AI companion.
find what you need with AI companion. As I was investigating the page, I actually noticed that there's stuff at the
Link.
top.
Watch the latest main region. Main navigation region end. Main region. Link. Watch the latest work transformation summit. Watch now.
So it says, watch the latest
Link. Watch the latest work transformation summit. Watch now.
work transformation summit. Watch now. I don't know if that's a button or a link. I think
Link.
it is. Yeah, and then there's a link here that doesn't appear to be coded. What I wanted to point out to you though
Groups are transform your information into action with AI companion.
is it says transform your action into AI companion.
Heading level 1. Find what you need when you need it with AI companion. Identify,
And
execute, and groups. Link. Watch the latest work main region.
for some reason, there was a graphic that has gotten lost
Hero 4
now.
graphic.
Yes, here we
Link.
go.
Zoom workplace.
Where it says discover Zoom workplace, there's a graphic
Hero 4
there
graphic.
that says Hero 4. I don't really know what that means. Not sure what they're trying to tell us there. So as you can see, even just trying to use this, there are different things that are presenting in different ways. And so being able to come in and have a conversation around not just, I did an audit and this is what popped, but other ways to analyze that user experience is going to actually make it a cleaner experience for others. Now, I again, I just was doing
Screen share. Your screen share has been stopped.
a quick share, so or a quick demo on that, just to kind of give that insight. What I'd love to do now is turn it over to Maya and Dan to talk a little bit about Maya's experience. And so, Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Maya and have that conversation?
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And I think everybody just got a little peek at what it's like trying to use a website with a screen reader. It seems pretty confusing, and I'm always amazed in the many conversations I've had with you, Jeremy, You're operating the website, you're operating Zoom, you're looking at the chat window, you're sending me meeting requests. I mean, it's pretty amazing what you can do through your ears, and it's not easy. And when we were looking at that big menu in Zoom, I think the problem we're faced there is not necessarily that you can't see it. It's just there's so many options. The information architecture, as we call it, we could be having a look at that to try and make it simpler and easier for people to understand. There's a lot of issues. But anyway, moving on to Maya, I met you a few years back. You work at Shell, and I've been working with Shell for almost 20 years, actually. And
Mhm.
Shell are one of the best companies I have worked for in terms of what I would call their digital governance. They have a really strong web estate. There's many hundreds of websites. Shell.com and the main one. There's lots of country sites and all kinds of different brand and product sites. So there's hundreds of websites. It's a big issue. You have strong central governance at Shell, and I got to tell you, when we analyze websites against the WCAG standards, at least, Shell generally comes out really high up. You do really, really well, way better than most companies, in fact. And that's why I wanted to talk to you because you're one of the companies that are doing it well. Your job actually is, you're the principal there for inclusive design and accessibility. So you've been working on this stuff for years. And even though you're in a company that does a great job, I wanted to ask you, what were the barriers you faced on that journey, and how did you get things to where they are now?
Well, I didn't get there on my own, Dan. I can tell you that. And I'd say that the most common barriers I faced, it will be a very familiar story to anybody who's been in this space for any length of time, because it really starts from a lack of awareness. Uh, A lot of people still don't even know what digital accessibility is, have never heard of it, and I think that needs to become something that will be introduced in school. I really hope it gets picked up there, but it's a lack of awareness fundamentally. And with COVID, with the big push online, yes, absolutely. In the last few years, I have seen a massive increase in the awareness of this thing that you need access to online, and there may be barriers in place. But I would say that the understanding is still flawed at the moment. It's still a little bit shallow, but we're making progress, and more people have heard of digital accessibility and are willing to work on it. Um, uh, the second one is something that was mentioned in the chat, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who who mentioned it, but it ties in with what I like to call accessibility myths. It is a perception of what accessibility is and what you need to do in order to be accessible. And the top three that I hear have heard always are: it takes too long, it's too restrictive, and it's too expensive. And we touched on that a little bit, but all of those myths, as I see them, create a bias against accessibility, or at least a perception of, "Oof, this is too big. Um, it's too big a thing for us to tackle right now. We'll get to it later." So I'm really quite pleased with the EAA coming into effect, and that giving an incentive for us to look at it now. Sooner than later is always better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it has been around for a long time. This is not new. Sadly, companies in particular, have not made their best efforts to go along with the guidelines that exist. But now they're being pushed in the right direction. So that can only be a good thing. But it's a huge problem to solve. We just saw it in action with Jeremy's quick demo. And if you've got a lot of websites and a lot of web pages, Yeah, that's a huge amount of work. And unfortunately, we got to use tools. We got to spread the word. Awareness is a key thing that you said there, Maya. And I think one of the things you told me in a conversation we had recently was that awareness perhaps needs to start with accountability uh, and leadership. And what have you got to say there about trying to get the buy-in from the senior people to be accountable and take this issue seriously?
Well, bring me back, Dan. But one thing I just want to touch on, but before I talk about leadership, is you are absolutely right in that accessibility is not something that the nerdy specialist off in the corner does. Accessibility is a part of every role. Anybody who has anything to do with, I would say, a digital environment has a role to play in making something accessible. And um, that means that on a grassroots level, it's talking to people and getting that understanding and buy-in so that you have allies and people who are also advocating for and including accessibility considerations into their day-to-day work. When Because at the bottom or at the heart of things, it's about what motivates people. So in order to get buy-in at the top level, um, you need to think about what are their motivators. And I recently heard Christopher Patno at Google talking, and he had a couple of examples of how you can, when you're speaking to very senior leadership, there are archetypes that you can think of. And two of the archetypes he spoke about really stuck with me, which I found very, very helpful in creating a narrative when you're speaking to them. And one is the risk averse CEO. This is somebody who will be motivated by, for example, the upcoming EAA or the increase in ADA suits in the US. And that is all about talking to them about the requirements, the regulations, what happens if you're not accessible. Um, the other archetype that I thought was very effective and perhaps in some ways more fun to play with is the FOMO type of archetype, where you can speak to them about um, the innovative side of things and look at what other companies are doing, look at what Apple, for example, or Google is doing in this space, and show them that this is a brand to aspire to, and get them motivated to think, well, if they're doing this, I can do it too. And it I prefer that route. I find it more fun, but at the heart of it, you need to think about what motivates the person that you're speaking to, that you're trying to convince to do something for you, and then craft your narrative around that. And it differs from person to person.
That's right.
Making
And
things, yeah. Go
I think
ahead. Sorry.
finding that sort of leadership champion is important. Whatever is necessary to get their attention and get their buy-in, we got to play into. So that's a key thing, certainly, to unlock those budgets that we need. You kind of mentioned earlier that accessibility folks sometimes are the people who sit in the corner doing that accessibility thing. You know,
Hmm.
maybe they work in IT or they're an accessibility specialist or something like that. And that talks to the problem of thinking of accessibility as something that you add at the end. We'll do this big project and then we will check it for accessibility and we'll fix it up. And it doesn't really work that way, unfortunately. It's too late at that point. Now, you can on your digital platforms, your tech stack, as it were, you can make sure they're as accessible as possible. You mentioned Google, but also Microsoft and Apple, they're all doing really, really good work on accessibility. They're building these tools directly into the operating systems, which is wonderful.
Yes.
But when companies deploy their websites and digital experiences on top of those platforms, they've got to keep trying and making the effort themselves. So it's about raising the awareness with everyone. And so even if you made the technology itself accessible, the problem then becomes the content because it's hundreds of people in the company are writing press releases, putting up blog posts, uploading PDFs and images and so on. And they're the moments where you need to be thinking accessibility. You got to put text descriptions on images. You got to put captions or and transcripts on videos, and all of these small details need thinking about. And what I've noticed is it's the need for more content faster. That's what everyone's pushing. Quick, get it out. We've got to get this
Mm.
out. We've got a deadline. There's a campaign. And that's when these corners get cut and they cannot be cut anymore. So we need to start thinking about better content faster, not just more content faster. So trying to give people the tools, the people who are actually publishing these pages, they need to have better awareness. But we can't make them all accessibility experts. So how have you found tackling that problem has worked for you?
Well, I think the setup that we have at Shell, it has been really effective in that. I mean, I worked with an absolutely brilliant team of very passionate digital marketers, and I spoke to them constantly about accessibility, what that meant, the things I would like them to think about when they were working with their stakeholders to produce content for the web. And this is what I mean with it. It's not something that you do at the end. It's part of the education because well, I think it would depend on who you spoke to, but over the years, I'm sure I wore down more than a few people to become they couldn't help think about accessibility anymore. They knew that if they were going to be working with a video, that we would want to see a transcript. We'd want that video to have captions. We want with images like Jeremy, you were saying hero for what is that? Who knows? So think about why you're adding something to the page. It improves accessibility, but it will probably also help improve the performance of your campaign as well if you're consciously thinking about what you're adding. And that team of very professional, very passionate digital marketers, they are how I think we evolved the Shell website estate to slowly become accessible over time. It's a team sport. It's not something that a solo person does, and it's not something you do at the end. The way to innovate, the way to make things beautiful and accessible is to think about it from the very beginning, and then you can
Yeah.
budget it. It all works like magic with
Yeah.
a bit of effort, but.
And there's a lot of other benefits. This is not all just for Jeremy and his screen reader, because if you do all of these things for improved accessibility, you're going to make your website rank higher in search engines. You're going to find that the AI bots who are now busy absorbing all the content on the internet are find your company information easier to find and index and put in the chat GPT answers as well. So it's as we've tried to make the point that from the whole of this webinar, this is not just about people with disabilities. This is just about making websites better for everybody, including AI as it happens. So we need to
Indeed.
wrap this segment up, and I'm just going to finish with this final question. What did you wish you would have known when you started on this accessibility journey?
Oh, well, I think I can boil it down to two things. One is there's no need to strive for perfection. It's about adaptability and it's constant, it's continuous. So you're continually improving. You don't need to go for perfection. And the other one is honestly speaking, I'm glad I didn't know how tough it would be sometimes. That might have deterred me, but there are bright moments where somebody reaches out to you and essentially says you're making a difference and that will keep you going for a very long time.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that experience. It is a big and a difficult topic, and it is going to be off-putting for a lot of people, and that's why the state of the web world is as it is. It's not as good as it should be, but hopefully that's going to change starting here, at least for everyone on this webinar. And now I'm going to hand back to you, Jeremy, to wrap it up. Thanks, Maya.
All
Thank you.
right, and huge. Let's give some thumbs up, some applause via the reactions thing for what a great conversation that was. And you actually, I just made an addition to slide 17 as Juan Carlos is bringing that up. I don't know if it actually is going to take in the moment, but we'll see, because what it reminded me as we're talking about tools. And Melanie, if you're taking off, tell us before you leave in the chat one thing you're taking away from today. But I just want to quickly talk about some tools that are available to you, and then we're going to actually open it up for Q&A before we check out of today's conversation. But one of the things that you reminded me of, Dan, is the bake it in from the beginning, right? It is so difficult to put chocolate in a cake after you've already baked the cake. And I'll say that again just for effect. It's so difficult to put chocolate in a cake after you've already baked it. And that's the concept that we like to talk about a lot with our clients is, yep, you've got accessibility checkers via Microsoft. You've got accessibility check. Google's got its own, right? And in fact, it's actually gotten to the point where when I'm typing this presentation or putting stuff into the presentation, there's a thing that comes up at the top that tells me if it's accessible or not. Is it always right? Nope, it's all AI, right? So you have to have that second pair of eyes. But there are tools that are available that are AI related tools. What we try to do at CurbCut is to help you bake it in from the beginning. So it's a very systematic approach to accessibility. It's not just a one-off transactional type of approach. One of the other things that we actually do with our scanning solutions, and I don't like to focus just on scanning, but I feel it's a great example of what we're talking about here. And as you can see, there's a picture on the screen right now that shows the results from our automated, from one of our automated test audits that we ran. But we use multiple rule sets. We don't just use one scanner to do an automated test of a website. Our solution actually brings multiple scanners into play, which means you're going to get all of these results collated together and giving you an opportunity to see that one scanner is showing this, one scanner is showing this, but it's happening at this particular point. Other things that CurbCut actually is really big on, we have a partnership with Ipsos that we tap into, where we actually align user flow testing right in with automated and manual testing as well. So it's not just, did you pass WCAG? It's what's the user experience look like? We have a whole enablement training section that we talk about with our clients, where it's, again, going back to that baking it in from day one. Let's help you design, develop, and code with accessibility in mind. You will actually find that that is much cheaper in the long run because, again, you're baking it in from the beginning. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on our services, but I will say, if you have interest in talking about them, of course, I am here to answer those questions at another time. But let's move to slide 18. What questions are you having? Please unmute yourself. Tell me your name and what question do you have for me, Dan, Maya. We'd like to at least address a couple questions before we wrap up for the day. Thank you, Melanie, for your takeaway. I love that. If others have to leave, feel free to drop your takeaway in the chat. I am going to give you an opportunity, though, to ask questions first before we start wrapping up. So Anybody? No problem, Melanie. Thank you for coming. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, hi there. How you doing? Marcelo here. Can I say something to?
Sure, Marcella, go ahead. What can we do for you?
So, no, it's actually a question for the three of you. From a user perspective, from a commercial perspective, and of course from a technical and groundbreaking, like Maya's work is testimony. What do you guys believe will be the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years in accessibility? Is there something you can, put your couple of cents on?
Maya and Dan, you guys want to give us a bullet point on your thoughts? Let's go to Maya first. Sorry, Dan.
Sorry. Well, I think the big space to watch, Marcello, and thanks for joining, is AI. I'm already seeing AI being included in a lot of the auditing tools, sometimes responsibly, sometimes question mark. So that's the space that I have got my eye on at the moment.
Dan, your thoughts?
Okay, well, one thing I will say is that, this legislation that we've already seen in the US, and I know there have been many thousands of lawsuits filed in the last year or so, and I'm sure we're going to see plenty of those happening in Europe too, once this new legislation comes in. We can't fix everything. There's already thousands of websites and millions of pages, and to fix that backlog of problems is actually impossible. Don't try to do that. Don't try and boil the ocean. It isn't going to work. No one's got enough time or budget or resources to do that. The important thing is to build it into your thinking now. Make sure all of the new things that you produce are accessible. Look at what are your top pages, your most popular pages. Get those fixed first. You don't have to fix everything because that ain't never going to happen. Concentrate on the highest, most valuable pages, the busiest pages, and essentially everything new that you start putting out there from this day onwards.
And I'll kind of piggyback on that. I don't know if it's Marcella or Marcella, so I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. But I think over the next 3 to 5 years, the companies that you are going to see exceeding are the companies who are taking a shift left, systematic, maturity modeling type of approach. It's not transactional. Can you scan my website and tell me how I'm doing? It's a great way to get started, by the way, right? But the companies who are going to lead in not just accessibility, but I think you're going to have that trickle down of improved user experience, improved customer retention, employee retention, all the things that we talked about today. It's going to be because they're taking a shift left approach. And I'm not talking left in politics. It's just kind of the phrase that we use. The idea being that, kind of like what you were saying, let's help you bake it in from the beginning. Let's help you be systematic about it. Let's look at benchmarking. How are you doing today? And then how are you doing next year? How are you doing the year after that and the year after that? Because what that actually does is it makes digital accessibility for your company driving outcomes like customer retention or market share or increased sales. So it integrates that all together. And it also gives companies the ability to really assess what's working and what's not working. Yep, I think AI is going to play a role in that, of course. I mean, as a blind guy, I have access to be able to have something transcribe what a picture looks like to me. I never had that, right? I got married 9 years ago. I just literally saw my own wedding pictures or had them detailed described to me like maybe a week ago. That was an amazing experience. So AI is going to play a role in that. But I think it's also the companies who understand that it is not just digital accessibility, it's the trickle down impacts of how that impacts the employee, excuse me, impacts the employee experience, the customer experience, and more so, the user experience? So great question. I know we're running out of time. Again, if you've got a burning question, you've got to ask it, or this just isn't worth your time. Do I have any of those before I wrap us up? 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, if you do have burning questions, stay after. I'm happy to answer those. Listen, very quickly, to check us out for today, I would love it if each of you would consider just sharing with us one thing that you're taking away from today's conversation. If you want to do that in the chat, that's absolutely amazing. If you want to quickly come off mute and share, that's great. Christian or Jerry, anything to share about something you're taking away from today's conversation? I'm just going to kind of call, okay? If not, that's okay. Ooh, I love that. The forecast that I will increasingly play a role. So right, Christian, on that. Julia, I'd love to hear from you. Marcella, if you haven't weighed in. Rob, if you haven't weighed in as well, I think Sarah may have put something in the chat. It's really hard for me as a blind person to monitor the chat and talk at the same time. So if I did miss something there, that's great. Anybody want to come off of mute and say one or something you're taking away? And we're starting to lose people. So thank you again to everybody for today's conversation. Thanks to Maya. Thank you to Dan. It is so great to be working with all of you, and just so excited to be hosting this conversation and available to help you on your digital accessibility journey. I want to say a huge thanks to Juan Carlos for helping me with the logistics of today. Again, a huge thanks to Dan and Maya, and all of the amazing work that you are doing. I think, Marcella, you put it perfectly. It's about a day-to-day change, right? It's about how do we embrace what we're learning and how do we move that forward together. So thank you, everybody. This concludes today's webinar. If you have additional questions, please stay after, and I'm happy to answer those. Thanks a lot to everybody.
Bye, everyone.